Good afternoon, one and all. Welcome to another Sunday roundtable. This Sunday episode going to be different. It's going to be different because we want to take what you'd call a deep dive into Prime Minister Holness financial transactions over the years. And we want to do this because there's two pieces of information out there. There is information in an article published in 18 Degrees North, talking about the Prime Minister company in St. Lucia and what have you, tax breaks. We want to look at that, and the author of that article, the publisher of that article, will join us. Another bit of information that came out was a video posted on Wayne Lonesome program in which a gentleman from Nannyville, I say Nannyville because that's where he said he's from, accused the Prime Minister of, well, I wouldn't say accused, but he's demanding that the Prime Minister return his land, and in a threatening tone. Seems like this man have some information about the Prime Minister and his wife, their transaction, financial transaction, and what have you. For me, it raised some serious questions. Primarily, can we trust this Prime Minister? Can we really trust Prime Minister Holness? Or is it that the Prime Minister is engaged in what some call politics of deception, a three-card trick guy? And I say that because Zara is here.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome, sister. Oh, come. We're just starting up. So the question is, can we trust the Prime Minister at the transaction? And shouldn't we be looking much deeper? Because personally, I have no clue as to what is happening. I know that this man entered politics. When he did, he said he had 47 million. That was in 1997. Now this man declared himself as what? Having over $150 million. I might be off. But it surprised me that from 1997 to 2004, no, 24, this Prime Minister financial asset is over $100 million. And all we know is one job he has been doing. MP and now Prime Minister. So what the hell is going on? That's a question we want to explore. And with me today, I have Las Crawford, Herb Nelson, and the publisher of 18 Degrees North, Miss Zara Burton. Welcome, my sister. Welcome, everyone. Herb, take it from here. You've been doing a lot of digging. What can you tell us? What can you say to the listener about the Prime Minister? Is he engaged in what some call politics of deception? Say one thing, but he's doing other things behind closed door. We don't know, but this is just an investigation, an exploration. Herb, what can you say?
Well, thank you, Mike, and greetings to our panel, Las Zara, and I expect Mike to join us momentarily. But this is and to the audience as well, those listening in and those in our chat. This has been the $1 million question ever since I saw that interview Zara did on 18 Degrees North. And ever since I've been watching various clips on YouTube, and noted that if the prime minister did come in with 47 million, as he says, why was his wife saying that around the time that they got married, which I believe is 1997? Is that right, Zara? 1997 they got married. Let me
1997
see.
they got married. I don't
I
think
think
so.
I I I think it was. Let me see here. Yep, that's what I have. Where it started. That they were going to same high school, so they saw each other after he took her to a sixth form prom, and they continued their relationship, and finally got married, and that was around 1997. Um, I'm looking for earlier date, but I don't have that exact date right now. But in any case, she said in an interview when asked about their courtship that they had no money. He said in a previous interview around 2005 he was supposed to pay back his school fees, which was about 2,000 US dollars, and he said he had no money to pay it back. So if he's now saying that he had 47 million, and I'd love to know when he made that declaration, it just does not add up. Either you had the money to pay back the school fees or you didn't. And if you declared that, and your wife now declared you had no money, they had no money, she didn't have the money either. How did you accumulate all this wealth? And I've seen in another declaration where I believe it was Integrity Commission's notes that he's now worth over 192 million Jamaican. So if that's his current status, which is nearing 200 million Jamaican, he's doing quite well. However, what does not add up are several um, investments and a lack of loan information that does not exist. But I'm not the expert on that. And so I'm going to ask the expert herself to now outline her report to us, and we can listen in and we can ask the appropriate question. Mike, with your permission, uh, Miss Zara Burton.
Yes.
So you're talking about the report that I just did?
Yes, that one. If you
Okay.
want to go back to your interview, that's fine.
Gosh, I've gone that one over a lot. Okay, so hi everybody. I'm Zara Burton. I'm the founder of 18 Degrees North, and it's an investigative newsletter. All of you can sign up if you want at www.18degreesnorth.tv as under my handle. So thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about such an interesting issue, especially because at the end of the day, Andrew Holness is our Prime Minister. And Herb is talking about an episode that I had done from way back when. This was in 2016. And it was an episode about Mr. Honus's big house and where he got the money to buy this big house. Well, during the search for answers to this question, in addition to the big house, which is up in Beverly Hills on Shenstone Drive in St. Andrew, Upper St. Andrew, the other properties that I found that were owned by the entity that owned the Beverly Hills house, and I should say that entity, ADMAT Incorporated, is based in St. Lucia. That was the entity that owned this big house in Beverly Hills. And so people were asking, I remember specifically reading it, which is what triggered my investigation. I read a question in the papers, in the Gleaner, why does a St. Lucia entity own your house? That was an open question put to Mr. Holness. And so it started my investigation. And as I said, included in that investigation was an issue regarding other properties that I found that were bought without listed mortgages. And I want to stress that, without listed mortgages. And listed mortgages is different from mortgages, because listed mortgages just means on the title of your property. Usually if you get a loan from a bank, JN or GMMB, you would see an entry on the mortgage title that says the transfer of this property occurred on such and such date for such and such money, and GMMB has an interest in this property to the tune of $15.9 million. So that's what they were owed at the time of the purchase. When I looked at the properties that ADMAT had purchased in Jamaica, I did not see any listed mortgages for any of them, despite these purchases occurring starting in 2008, September of 2008. The first purchase was an Acadia apartment that was 16 million Jamaican dollars. Then in 2009, there was a piece of land in Beverly Hills, 15.275 million Jamaican dollars. Then in 2011, another piece of land in Beverly Hills, the one on Shenstone Drive, for 300,000 US dollars, and again, no listed mortgage. I found it strange. It goes on. The house that was constructed at Shenstone Drive, Mr. Holness had put out a statement because people had, it had gotten to a point where he couldn't, at this point in the elections during February of 2016, he could no longer just ignore it because it really had become a voice of its own. I hadn't come out with my story at this point because my story aired May of 2016. But in the 2015 late, just when I was getting triggered to do this investigation and going into 2016, there was some clamoring about where he got the money to buy and put up this big house. So he put out a statement and explained where he got the money. And he basically said, I'm going to try and find the actual statement, but he talked about how the funds at GMMB and SSL, which is now, as you know, going through a whole fraud investigation. But this is before that. This was in 2016. He put out this information. And he said that he started negotiations for this purchase of the land in 2010. Now, remember, this is the Shenstone Drive property. And he essentially paid off everything, completed in August of 2011. And for the property, the land, he says, funds from my accounts at GMMB and Stocks and Securities were used to finance the purchase of the property. Note, he didn't say he took out a loan from GMMB or Stocks and Securities. He says funds from my accounts at GMMB and Stocks and Securities were used to finance the purchase of the property. So that's the land. Now, as far as the house is concerned, what he said was that this was built between 2012 and 2015. And the cost of that was about 52.6 million Jamaican, which if you aggregate it in US is about 500 something thousand US dollars. And so he built that over a 4-year period between 12 and 15, he said. And so here you have the $16 million purchase in 2008. You have the $15.275 million purchase, 2009 for another piece of land. This land at Shenstone Drive, 300,000 US. No listed mortgages on any of the three. And then you have another 52.6 million spent on building the house. He goes on to explain that for the house, the 52.6 million, he says a lot of this came from savings, his salary. He also said that he took out a $3 million mortgage from Jamaica National. He took out a $10 million home improvement loan from Scotiabank and supplier's credit because his wife is a real estate developer. So you have salary, savings, supplier's credit, and loans. One being a home improvement loan from Scotia and a $3 million mortgage from Jamaica National. Now, keep in mind that I didn't see any evidence of these home improvement loans on the title of any of these properties, nor did I see it on a property that existed from, I believe it was 2002, because when these properties were bought in a cluster, essentially from 2008 to 2011, there actually was only one property between the two that I found between our Prime Minister and his wife, Juliet Holness. And I believe this was in 2002. And what was interesting about that property was that that was bought for $7 million. It was a townhouse up in Mona. And they took out a mortgage in that instance. And the mortgage lender, I believe it was Jan, was listed there, you know, so they had in fact taken out a loan to buy that property for $7 million. And it was listed. Now, typically, when somebody would take out, let us say, borrowing against that house, for example, again, you would see another entry on that mortgage title of that bank that says, okay, another amount of money was taken out, and it would list the bank there, Jamaica National or Scotia or whatever the case is. So I didn't see any evidence of that. I'm not saying it didn't exist. I'm saying I didn't see any evidence of it. So fast forward now to my report in May of 2016, where I produced this story that spoke about not just the house in Beverly Hills that everybody was talking about before the election, which incidentally, after he explained himself, it didn't really matter because the point is he won the election in February of 2016. So he became our prime minister. Before that, he was our opposition leader. So we come down to my report now in May of 2016. And then there was a whole heap of brouhaha about where he got the money because they were surprised that there was just more properties than the one that everybody was talking about initially. So there's been a lot of focus on Mr. Holness's financials since that period of 2016. And that talk about his financials and his worth really stemmed, I would say, from that year of 2016, especially when my report hit the airwaves. And so he did in June, the following month after my report, he did put out a statement, not a statement. He did share his financials or his statutory declarations, I believe it was, a summary of those with 3 reporters. There was one from Nationwide, one from The Observer, one from The Gleaner, is my recall. And so he did share some financials, but I myself have not seen these financials, to be honest with you. Now, the reporters did do stories on the financials that he had, and so we can go into more detail about the financials that he did produce and whether he really did have the money. In fact, that could very well be the subject of another piece that I do. But the point is that since that time, a couple of things changed. One is that even though the Prime Minister and all of the parliamentarians were required to give in their statutory declaration each year, before my report, everything was private. After my report, the opposition leader and the Prime Minister's financials then became public. A summary of them became public. So we don't have the specific details, but a summary. And so each year, the Integrity Commission does this, I guess, they would put out the summary and they would say something to the effect as, this has been certified as duly completed. But in the case of Mr. Holness, even though he did have one such time period, and I think it was 2020, which is after my report, that had that summary released, and it's up on the Integrity Commission's website that you can see there. And also it listed that this has been certified duly completed. The latter parts of his declaration, so 2000, I think it was 21, was not certified, and they have not been certified duly completed since then. So especially the opposition, they've really taken him to task a lot about that issue. And so there's this cloud that continues to hang over Mr. Holness's head regarding his financials. Now, one of the things I want to highlight is that the St. Lucian entity, ADMAT Incorporated, at the time, it was explained to 18 Degrees North, my news outlet to me specifically, by his attorney, that this kind of structure allows for avoidance of things like transfer tax, stamp duty, if it is that the entity, whatever underlying properties that the entity has, sells that to somebody else, let's say. All it means is that ADMAT would become transferred. So let us say it was my company. ADMAT Incorporated, instead of it being Zara Burton's company now, would be transferred to Herb Nelson. And so the owner of ADMAT would change, but the underlying assets, so in other words, the house at Acadia, the Beverly Hills land, the Shenstone Drive property that was owned by ADMAT, those titles would not change if they were all transferred in one whole swoop to Herb Nelson from Zara Burton. So let's do Andrew Holness. So if Andrew Holness, owning ADMAT, wanted to transfer, and he owns it, by the way, with his two children, Adam and Matthew Holness. That's what he said. That's what his attorney said. And if you transfer just the shares of the company to Herb Nelson from Andrew Holness, let's say, you don't usually have to pay transfer tax, stamp duty, because it's a transfer of the shares of the overarching entity and not transfer of the individual properties. Now, the story I just did that came out 2 weeks ago, but I actually released it on my website for free today so that everybody could see. And so you can sign up on the website and go and see it for yourself. But in that story, we looked at the fact that in 2021, ADMAT was actually dissolved. So it doesn't exist anymore. So this is 2016 to now. It is now dissolved. Now, bear in mind, it was set up in 2008 ahead of the first purchase. It was set up in February of 2008 for the very first purchase in September of 2008. Okay, so the same year it was set up is the same year that the housing or the property buying spree began. Anyway, it was dissolved in December of 2021. And based on what happened, there was no avoidance of transfer tax or of stamp duty. That needs to be made clear for those three properties. So Acadia was actually sold in 2016. When my report came out, I actually mentioned that it was purchased in 2008 for $16 million. sold in 2016, 8 years later, for only 16.5 million, which bewilders me, because if you take out the lawyer fees and all the various transaction tax and this tax and whatnot, you're at a loss position. So I don't understand what happened there, but that first apartment was in fact sold at a loss, and transfer tax and stamp duty were paid. So that's 016. Come now to 2021, when ADMAT was being dissolved. What happened is that the properties were transferred. The one up in Shenstone Drive, the big Beverly Hills house, was transferred to an entity called Imperium Investments Holdings Limited. That entity is a Jamaican entity, and the only director and shareholder is Mr. Holness himself. So he transferred the property to an entity in Jamaica. The second property that I spoke, or the third property that I spoke about, was a land up in Beverly Hills on Waycliffe Close. That property was also transferred to a Jamaican company from ADMAT. And that company is called Estate Bridge Development Limited. That company has as its shareholder Imperium Investments Holdings, which is backed by Mr. Holness. I just told you that. Then there is Adam Holness, his son. Then there's Sijaya Anderson, which is his sister. Then there's another guy who is Norman Brown. He is the Housing Agency of Jamaica chairman, which means that in addition to having this private interest with Mr. Holness for a development, which is actually going on there, there's a building of townhouses going on there, 4 townhouses to be exact. So he's building houses with Mr. Holness, but he's also building government houses over at the HAJ and reporting to Mr. Holness. So they have both a public and a private relationship. So the point is, ADMAT is dissolved. ADMAT did pay the taxes for stamp duty and transfer tax. And the Jamaican entities, basically backed by Mr. Holness and his connections, are now the owners of these properties that I mentioned, and ADMAT no longer owns the Acadia apartments. Incidentally, when the Acadia apartment was sold in 2016, the lawyer for Mr. Holness at the time, Patrick Bailey, told me that he owed money to suppliers. The suppliers had helped him to build the house up in Shenstone Drive. And so this money may have been used to pay back supplier credit. The money, the 16.5 million that was gotten from the Acadia sale. So there's more to it, but I don't know if you have any questions. I can keep going, but maybe you have questions at this point because there's a lot more to the story. Hello?
Yeah, we're
Okay,
listening.
Mike,
Are you finished?
I want to welcome
finished?
you to the discussion.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Zara, are you finished?
Well, I can be finished. I don't know if you have any questions so far, but I can keep going as well because there was more stuff in my story.
Show me your wallet.
Okay. Last
I find the information quite interesting. I'm following along quite intensely. I don't mind Zaria continuing until we have some questions.
Okay. So I can continue, and I will say to you that, interestingly, when ADMAT purchased, let's use it this way. When ADMAT purchased that house in 2008, or let's not even use the purchase, let's go back to the actual incorporation. So in 2008, I mentioned that this St. Lucian entity, ADMAT, was incorporated. Now, as I said to you before, his attorney told me that one of the reasons people set up these offshore structures is for estate planning. And Mr. Holness himself on the campaign trail in 2016, February, told me the same thing, that it was set up for estate planning. But estate planning just means the same exact thing that I said earlier, which is to avoid some taxes like transfer tax and stamp duty. So what would happen is, let us say that you are Mr. Holness, you have ADMAT, and you have your 2 children on ADMAT, and you die, Mr. Holness dies, God forbid. And his children are already on ADMAT, so there is no transfer tax or anything. They already own ADMAT. Traditionally, if he didn't put his children on ADMAT, his children would be required to pay transfer tax on acquiring the land. At the time it was land, and also the various properties. They would have been required to pay transfer tax. And at the time, transfer tax was about, I'm forgetting fully right now, but I think it was about 7.5%, something like that, was the transfer tax for estates. And so when you have a huge estate, that's a very significant tax to have to face. So by having this set up in St. Lucia, it just means that the children would have saved on that transfer tax. Incidentally, Juliet Holness, his wife, he didn't say that Juliet Holness was a shareholder of ADMAT, which is another interesting point. Juliet Holness, it was said in the Gleaner, according to the attorney, Patrick Bailey, that Mr. Holness intended to will his portion in ADMAT to Juliet Holness, his wife. So let's say in the traditional sense, right, Juliet Holness is not on ADMAT. Let's go with that point of view. If she's in fact not there, then technically speaking, right, if it was a situation where it was just supposed to be willed to everything, you know, she could potentially have to pay certain estate transfer taxes and that kind of thing. However, because of ADMAT, she could very well just become a shareholder of ADMAT, Mr. Holness's portion, and not have to pay those transfer taxes and that kind of thing. So transfer taxes are now only 1.5% after the first 10 million. So they've been reduced drastically since 2008 when ADMAT was set up. So you can understand the motivation back then why people wanted to set these things up, because taxation was high at the time. And so even on a transfer of a property, even while you were alive, that 7.5% was still the transfer tax. And the stamp duty, well, for estate taxes, it was around 3%. And for, if you were alive, for, you know, just a transfer, stamp duty was, I think it was like 5.5%, something like that. I don't know if Herb has the story in front of him, could cross-check me on what the number is in the story. But I think it's about 5.5% at the time. So just imagine 7.5 plus 5.5, that's what, 13?
Yeah.
That's a lot of money being paid over to the government. So not just Mr. Holness, several individuals in the private sector were setting up these structures in the umbrella of estate planning so that when they passed on, their beneficiaries wouldn't have to pay these transfer taxes. Incidentally, just one thing about transfer taxes. Sometimes they don't apply if it's like, let us say, your primary home. That's a little caveat. But remember, it wasn't just the primary home. I mean, it was several properties at the time. Yeah? So the point is that the focus of estate planning is still to avoid taxation. So now that we've seen that the properties actually paid transfer tax and stamp duty, the question is, why did Mr. Holness have ADMAT in the first place? And so that is a question that I maintain is still on the table. Why did Mr. Holness have ADMAT in the first place? Okay, let me also say about how much was paid. Because remember, I just told you that when ADMAT was set up in 2008, the transfer tax and the stamp duty was about 7.5% and 5.5%. So it was significant in 2008. Now, under Bruce Golding's administration, that rate started coming down, okay? And it started coming down in May of 2008. So it was, ADMAT was set up in February, and the government itself started reducing transfer tax and stamp duty rates under Bruce Golding. And they started to incrementally come down. Now, when Mr. Holness came into office, in fact, before he came into office in February of 2016, he told me personally, right? This was a campaign pledge of his. So he was going on about the different taxes he wants to reduce and that kind of thing. And so I asked him about the taxes he'd like to reduce. And he did say he wanted to reduce stamp duty and transfer tax, because he felt like he wanted to increase the velocity of transactions to help the Jamaican economy along, you know, to help grow the economy. Now, he did deliver on that pledge in 2019. So he got elected in 2016 and delivered on that pledge in 2019, because in 2019, his administration reduced transfer taxes. At this point, I think they were about maybe 5.5% and 4%, something like that, or 5% and 4%, something like that. I'll have to double check. As soon as my article comes up, I'll double check it to tell you. But the point is, Mr. Holness ended up reducing transfer tax. I think it was 5% to 2%. So transfer tax came down to 2%, and it benefited a lot of us, okay, including me. But the point is, it came down to 2%. Now, stamp duty in 2019 became a flat fee. So instead of it being a percent of what you actually, so the seller is usually responsible for all of the transfer tax, and the seller is usually responsible for half of the stamp duty. So it's a big chunk of money that you have to pay as the seller when you're selling property. Yeah? Okay. So the transfer tax coming down to 2% is a huge savings. The 2%, I want to make the point about the stamp duty though. It became a flat fee. So instead of it being a big amount, it became something like 5,000 Jamaican dollars to sell property. So you could go from having to pay hundreds of thousands of Jamaican dollars to paying $5,000, a flat fee, which is like 30 US dollars today. And additionally, in Mr. Holness's case, when he actually transferred from ADMAT to the entity Imperium Investments, this was his Shenstone Drive house. It was 120 million was the value, but because it was a gift to Imperium, and you can do that legally, he gifted from ADMAT to Imperium this property for 120 million. The consideration was essentially nothing because it was a gift, because the stamp duty he paid was only $100 Jamaican, which is 66 cents roughly US dollars. So 66 cents US, sorry. So he did benefit significantly from his own policy, is the point I want to make. And I can go into to how much he actually could have paid. I did a whole analysis about this, but it might be too much for people to understand. But let's put it this way. It was millions of dollars in 2008. Let us say the same set of properties that were sold at the prices they were sold at, he would have had to pay millions of dollars worth of transfer tax and stamp duty. Okay?
Zara, let me interject for a second, because you give an example. Instead of paying $9 million in transfer tax based on Jamaica's February 2008 rate of 7.5%, assuming the year of sale and sale value were the same, the transfer of Shenstone Drive from ADMAT to Imperium in November 2021 cost ADMAT only $2.4 million. The difference, if people want to use their imagination, $59,359 US
was what
came down to $15,829 US. That's a difference of $44,000 in transfer tax, and that was only 2% in 2021, right? So they gained significantly.
By his policy, he gained significantly in how he set up himself to be able to make this transfer.
Let me ask a question here. Zara, you have done a lot of investigation in what's happening here. That is clear. Is there anything illegal in what he has done?
I have not seen anything illegal in what he has done, and that's the truth. I've not seen anything illegal to this day. I have seen a pattern of what you would call non-payment of bills. That is what I will see, and that is what I will say. I have seen a pattern of non-payment of bills. But I have not, and I can go into details about what I mean by that, but I don't know if you want to go in a different direction. I don't want to go in a direction you don't want to go into, but I can go into detail about my evidence of why I say that there is a pattern he has of non-payment of bills.
Sure, why don't you share it? Go.
What kind of bills you're talking about?
Okay, so when I say non-payment of bills, I think all of us sometimes may, let us say, struggle to pay a bill here or there or whatever the case is, right? But what I'm saying is I'm not trying to poke out his eye on this, okay? That's not what I'm doing. What I am saying, though, is that there is a pattern. For instance, in 2016, when I looked at the property taxes for each of these properties, remember there was a land upon Waycliffe Close that was owned by ADMAT. There was the Shenstone Drive property in Beverly Hills as well. And there was the house that they both have, that they both are on the title of, Miss Holness and Mrs. Holness and Mr. Holness are on the title of in Mona. I couldn't find the Acadia taxes at the time. I guess because it's an apartment, it was harder. But for those three properties, ADMAT and he and his wife, because he and his wife owned the Mona house, they were outstanding for several years on their taxation. I think in some cases it was either 3 years, 4 years. I think for the one up in Waycliffe Close, it was like 7 years of being outstanding on your property taxes, right? No, as I said, I'm not trying to kill anybody. I mean, if you're outstanding for a year, even at 7 years, that's a lot of years to not be paying your taxes. Yeah? Okay, so that is one piece of evidence. He eventually, by the way, paid up after I brought it to his attention. But that to me was just out of embarrassment. Yeah. So you go and hurry up and you go pay bills and whatever, which is a good thing because I actually brought to the attention to several politicians' attention back then. And I remember one in particular telling me, oh, I'm going to pay it on Monday. And it was still outstanding after quite a long set of months. right? So to his credit, he paid them. All right, good. But in this story, ADMAT Incorporated, I'll tell you a little bit of a nugget, which is an interesting thing that will lead me down another path. So ADMAT Incorporated, as you know, was incorporated in February of 2008. And every year it's supposed to pay a bill to renew its registration to the government in St. Lucia. Yeah? Now, apparently it was paying its bill for the first couple of years. But as soon as it finished paying for the last land up in Shenstone, remember, 08 was the Acadia apartment. 09 was Wycliffe Close land up in Beverly Hills. 011 was Shenstone Drive land. As soon as Mr. Holness purchased through ADMAT Shenstone Drive in 2011, fees stopped being paid to the government of St. Lucia. To the point where in 2012, ADMAT was actually struck off the register in St. Lucia. So it was considered a struck off company, right? Now, I asked the registrar, how long was it struck off for? And if it was a consistent striking off. And they say, yes, from 2012 to 2021, it was fully struck off. So you ask yourself the question, how then could a struck off company sell Acadia, the apartment, in 2016? And I don't understand this to this day. The struck off company is not legally allowed to deal in the assets of its entity. That's according to the St. Lucia IBC Act, the International Business Company Act. You're not allowed as a struck off company to deal in the assets of the company. So I've been asking the question, how was this transaction able to go through? Being struck off. Anyway, still don't have the answer to that. And that's in the story as well. But case in point. So then now you come to 2021 and you ask, how was ADMAT able to dispose of Wycliffe Close up in Beverly Hills and Shenstone Drive in Beverly Hills in 2021 if ADMAT was struck off? Well, in 2021 November, ADMAT was actually temporarily restored. So they had to go to the court in St. Lucia, file documents in the court in St. Lucia, to request for this thing to be resuscitated. And so after paying a fee, and the fee was for, you remember all of these fees from 2011 that weren't being paid? So all the fees had to be paid in mass. US $5,550 was paid in mass one time in November 2021, roughly, around that time period. So the company gets resuscitated and it does these transactions in the same November 2021 where it transfers the Wycliffe Close property to Estate Bridge Limited, or Estate Bridge Development Limited, and it transfers the Shenstone Drive house to Imperium Investments Holdings Limited, both of them Jamaican companies. And then after those transfers occurred, the company is dissolved in December of 2021. So all of this happened in 1 month. But the point is, why I say that I think he has a history of not paying his bills in mass is because of these two pieces of evidence. One, he was outstanding to the government of St. Lucia, and so he had to pay in mass all these back fees. And also another situation where he couldn't pay or didn't pay, let's say didn't pay the transfer taxes for several years. As I say, it's not one or two that we're talking about here. In the case of Wycliffe, it was like 7 years. So that's one of the trends that I picked up with our prime minister. But when you talk about illegality, I have to tell you guys, I don't yet see any evidence of illegality.
Let me ask you this as
All
a
right,
follow-up to that.
hold on.
a second, Mikey.
All
Mikey,
right, before you do the follow-up, I want to pose the same question I asked Zora to Mike. Mike, you have looked at these documents and the reports. You see
Yes.
anything illegal?
Well, I'm familiar with Zara's report because I read it. And I think, though, in my business, there's a certain level of skepticism that comes with it. And I never think that the crime is out front for all to see. I think the questions, and I shouldn't probably say it's a crime, whatever is wrong is never that much out front. I think the question that begs, when I first saw Zara's report, I was astounded that the Prime Minister, maybe he's a genius, maybe his name should be Magician, Mandrake the Magician, I don't know, but he was able to acquire properties that were 11 and a half times his annual income when he was education minister. Because his salary was $60,000 and his acquisitions at cost were valued at $697,000 and change. That's about 11 and a half times what the Prime Minister makes. And I think that's where my questions are, because when I do due diligence on any matter, the due diligence is not just accepting what's in front of us. I think the due diligence requires you to look at the context. And one of the reasons I think why the Integrity Commission is now hesitant to sign off on his more recent financial disclosures is because I think they erred, and they erred badly. They're not going to say that, but they erred badly. So rather than say mea culpa, they're just sitting on the reports, waiting for some kind of explanation from him to justify what happened. Because the question, why that question looms so largely in my mind is, if you're able to acquire these properties, there should be some evidence of financial capability. There isn't any. And when you look at the different transfers that Zara mentioned, those are appropriate to ask, but I really honestly think that the original intent was concealment. And I think the other issues that occurred subsequently thereto may have been forced because the St. Lucia government changed their policy on inactive businesses that are operating in their environs. And therefore, when they changed the policy, he was forced to act more quickly than he anticipated. So now he's forced to reveal his hands, and because he did lay the groundwork, though, to transfer them by the virtue of the changes that started on the Golding administration regarding transfers and the like. So I think he anticipated moving it, but the Lucian government forced his timing. And when he did so, he still had the benefit of the Golding government and his government to carry out the transactions. And what happened subsequent to him being forced to show his hand does appear to be legal. But the question as to how he acquired it can lead to conjecture in many ways, simply because he did not have the financial capabilities of purchasing these properties. Mm-hmm. In one of the instances, I think Zara's report cited where she wasn't able to locate any form of debt that he may have incurred in acquiring any of the properties that he alleged to have acquired. Because other than this first property that he bought and shows a mortgage on it, there isn't anything else that can be found. And the equity in that first property was not that much to allow him to acquire the other properties. So, however the conveyance occurred where he got the properties, That is a question to be answered. And he has been unable to provide a satisfactory response. Now, I don't want to jump the gun, but to tie back to my point last week, when I spoke, referenced these issues, I said to you gentlemen, the question that begs is this: if the Prime Minister can conduct business the way he has, and there's no accountability, Jamaica cannot possibly present herself as a financial icon or epicenter of the Caribbean, because the institutions that have governance and oversight appear compromised. And the questions are begging as to where do you go for protection and the like if you're going to conduct business in Jamaica? Which institution should you be talking with? Because we've compromised several financial institutions in Jamaica, the SSL being the most recent, and nothing has been said. Now, the finance minister has promised that something is coming, but all the concern reports that were put out before by the FBI getting involved, they didn't hold water, because that's not how the FBI gets involved in stuff like that, especially when it's another nationality. They may assist for points of reference and support in terms of theory and the like, but they don't really lead those investigations because it's outside the domain of the United States, and the United States government has no nexus to this transaction or this institution. So there have been many conflicting statements given out regarding SSL, but it's left to be seen what the final outcome is. But back to your comments, Zara is right. She's unable to find any evidence of illegality. But I respectfully submit that I think we need to look more previously, and that's where the audit trail does not exist. You just happen to own these, and ADMAT existed for the purpose of concealment. And when he was forced to do so, ADMAT became known, and the rest, as they say, is history. So that's why I see that transaction right now.
He will say that, well, his attorney, and he, I think too, will say that everything he owns has been declared to the Integrity Commission. He will say that and has said that. His attorney told me that personally, that what he owns has been declared to the Integrity Commission. But we don't have any way of knowing that, because even though the Prime Minister's statutory declaration summary is made public, it's the summary. And so what you see are assets, liabilities, income, broad categories, real estate, mortgages, that kind of thing. We don't have the very specific details. And so it's really kind of difficult to ferret out if they're telling the truth. And I think that's an unfortunate situation.
I think he declared it because then he couldn't be accused of being uncooperative. However,
because it's the law. It's the law.
But with respect to the Integrity Commission, I think they're being somewhat derelict here, because it's been a while since they've said anything on the matter. He is the Prime Minister. He is the head man in Jamaica, and he has an obligation to be forthcoming. And I think that the Integrity Commission is giving him a pass, to the point where it's similar to some of the other issues that have appeared before the DPP, where they've run out the clock, or attempting to run out the clock in other issues.
Can I interject here?
Sure.
Been involved in intelligence for some time now. On this matter, there's a certain rumor on the streets of New York that the money that Holness is managing all his property, it's just a front for someone who is serving prison sentence up here. That the real owner of this property and money is someone, a drug dealer, who is serving time up here. That's the word on the street.
It's
Well,
quite possible.
let me just go back to that for a second. We see the same thing with Patrick Bailey and Junior Germain, right? Patrick Bailey invested money for Junior Germain. He was holding money. Junior was doing some nefarious stuff up here in the Philadelphia area. Sent all his money to Patrick, and he was supposed to have started the building of another house. Rumors had it that the house where Junior was living and Patrick's house actually belongs to Junior. And it might be the same setup where Patrick was able to make arrangements for somebody that Peter Phillips referred to, that's in the family, that's in New York, who they might have been holding stuff for, right? Now, I really didn't even want to go there because I know it might still be a court matter in Jamaica because they're suing Peter Phillips over those comments. So those are not my comments, right? But one thing I'd like to point out with our politicians here and anywhere else, malfeasance is an intentional act of wrongdoing, whereas misfeasance is an act that is lawful but performed negligently or improperly. Now, when Holness made those changes, what was his intent? Was it the intent that he would eventually make these switches from one company to another, or from him to his kids? Was he ensuring that the kids would not have to pay a whole bunch of money for the transfers? Right? What was his intent? And this is what the Integrity Commission can take a look at. Was it misfeasance that he did so? Was it non-feasance to the Parliament, including his wife, not to take any action to correct the laws to ensure that the people of Jamaica were not losing funds, tax funds, vital tax funds? Who put those laws into effect? And why was the Prime Minister making these changes that amounted to a loss in revenue to the country? I mean, that's the bigger question. He obviously made the changes to benefit. So what is the rules in the Integrity Commission that would have governed this? I'm sorry we don't have Mr. Rattigan on to give us the legal definition and review on this, but it's crucial to look at what he did as serving his own best interests and that of his family. What about the other families in Jamaica? Right? Why couldn't they get the same sweetheart deal? Eventually, they might have, depending on how long they held on to their properties. But, misfeasance and malfeasance are prosecutable under our laws here. I don't know about Jamaica. Maybe it should be there regardless, because it's all English common law, and it does stand up.
I don't know of any, to address Mikey's point about this rumor, I have never, ever, just for the record, found any evidence of that. Yeah. And as Herb said, it was, in fact, I think a legal issue at one point, although I really don't know what came of that legal issue. But at one point, there was some threatening of or actual filing of, I can't remember, some kind of suit. So I just want to say that from my standpoint, I have not found any evidence of that. And I will say, though, that, as I said, still remaining for me is a question that I think Ian and I have discussed. What is the purpose, or what was the purpose of having had ADMAT? That is a purpose that is not clear to me, despite how much work I've done on this thing.
If it was
Yes,
possible,
I
wanted to
have a
ask a
concern, listening to Mike.
Go ahead now.
Hold on. Yeah, I'm saying listening to Zara and Mike. My concern is the Integrity Commission Mike was making about this thing being, it's been on the waves for some time. I mean, in relation to the compliance with the filings. I mean, why is it that the Integrity Commission is giving the Prime Minister so much leeway, so much time, so much, I don't know, it seems that's a question on my mind, and I'm sure it's a question on people's mind. It seems as if, I mean, they're, I don't know if nervous taking this thing forward or very too careful. I mean, it seems almost as if, it's something they don't want to deal with. Why is this happening?
I think it might come down to
You pose
the
that question
courage.
to who?
It might come down to having the courage to be forthright, the political courage, because the problem is Jamaicans have a right to feel comfortable that their institutions are holding all parties to the highest standard. They have a right to feel like if there was some form of shenanigans, that because of the certainty of punishment and accountability, institutions such as the Integrity Commission will be more forthcoming. So, because I think the Integrity Commission may have hastily approved the initial declarations of the Prime Minister, which are inextricably tied to the subsequent declaration of the Prime Minister, the Integrity Commission is in the position of perhaps having egg on its face to explain how they could have been snookered in the first instance and have found Jesus in the second instance. And I think that then may cause them to become more flummoxed in not knowing how to go forward, because they're now busy seeking protection for their own hide and not meeting their responsibility. And again, that's conjecture on my part, but an institution that holds such a critical role at such a critical time in our country should not be silent this long. I mean, and then reasonable parties can disagree on many things in general, but reasonable parties will have to ask themselves, why is this hanging the way it is? Why? It's almost like suspended animation. And nobody's willing to touch it, and that's the problem.
Herb?
So what
Okay.
what you guys are doing, in my mind, is not just putting, just a minute, Mikey. Just let me finish. And what Zara and Mike are doing is not just putting Holness finances the microscope. it's also putting these institutions who are supposed to hold the people in power accountable. It is also put in microscope because it is showing that either these people are dragging their feet or they are part of the system of corruption or something, right? So people have to be concerned about these organizations who are supposed to that hold these politicians accountable and demand transparency of certain institutions. People have to be now concerned, why are they not working? And both of your work is highlighting that for all of us.
One of the things I'd like to point out as well, in addition to the issue of why did he have ADMAT in the first place, that being an overarching and outstanding question. I think, as I said, maybe the focus of another article I'm going to be coming out with, but it's regarding the amount of money that aggregately, I have a table in the article. If you go to www.18degreesnorth.tv and sign up, you'll see an article, the top one, that talks about, it's an aggregated list of all the purchases that ADMAT made with the price of the construction cost for Shenstone Drive. And so this is between 08 and 015, right? Where the Prime Minister was able to spend almost $110 million, yeah, on properties, whether in purchase of land or the actual construction. And in US, that comes to almost $2 million. And again, very little evidence we're seeing. In fact, I can tell you, I don't see any evidence of any loans to do this. Even though the Prime Minister did say there were loans, I'm just saying I don't see the evidence of these loans. So that is also a still outstanding question. Where did he get that money to be able to do these purchases? Because remember, the only one that we've seen before these sets of purchases and acquisitions and construction was, I think it's 02, the Mona House, and that was mortgaged. There was a mortgage.
I mean, we need to take a
I think
leap.
that's a serious question.
Yeah, Mike. We need to take a leaf from the office of the
Yeah,
Integrity
I think that's
Commission in St. Kitts. 1 February 2024. Charges filed against defaulters under Integrity in Public Life Act. Defiance meets consequence. And because these people, including a judge, general manager of a broadcasting company, right? Chairman of the Urban Development Corporation, a member of their Public Service Commission, the general manager of Nevis Air and Seaports Authority, right? We're talking about, the chairperson of Nevis Tourism Authority, another chairman and general manager at Nevlec. They didn't hesitate. They're throwing the book at these people. And these people will have to pay fines of up to $30,000 or imprisonment up to 3 years. So they're not playing games in an island smaller than ours in St. Kitts and Nevis. So why is the Integrity Commission hesitant to come down on the Prime Minister? Why did the DPP not take over the case when she had the opportunity? Because her prosecutor had come out with some statement to the fact that the time that and some misfiling that was done by the Integrity Commission would have impacted the case. Well, it's up to a jury to decide that. Let the jury decide. But the case need to be brought before the courts. Nobody gets a free ride in the public. So why is the people responsible for governance and for law enforcement, why are they getting a free ride? That's what I don't understand. You know, maybe something.
Probably because, probably,
Go ahead, Mikey.
they get a free ride because no one is asking the question that Zara just asked. Where did he get the money from? And I think that should be the critical thing. And I say that because before he got into Parliament, Holness worked in the non-profit sector for a while. Then he became a member of Parliament. You understand me? So the question, I think, is where did he get that money from? And I think that is where investigation and everything should start. Right? Herb?
But they have
the question, is that a fair question to ask? Where did he get the money from?
Yeah. They've investigated.
They have?
Yeah. And one of the things that they found when they did the investigation was that back in 2006 to 2009, he was in a partnership with an individual called Robert Garvin. I know Zara is familiar with this. And when he was at the Ministry of Education, he failed to report the awarding of OCG contracts because Mr. Holness awarded contracts to a company where at least one of the directors is a friend and a business partner for over 20 years.
Well, I wouldn't say that. Hold on, let's be clear. How do I say this? You know, he was also an MP, if you recall, for West Central St. Andrew, and still is the MP, but he's been there since 1997, I think. So he's been an MP from that time.
From 2006.
No, he's been an MP from 1997.
97. Okay.
1997.
Yeah, that's right. West Central St. Andrew MP for the opposition.
Right, and he's been in the same constituency.
Okay.
Now, the contract that he came under fire for having had an involvement in the whole awarding process really came down to two small ones, but two that were, I guess, implemented at the CDF level, Constituency Development Fund level. So that is the fund that deals with all the different individual constituencies. But there are government agencies like the Social Development Commission is one, the National Works Agency is another, that would implement contracts on behalf of the CDF. And so the contracts that his signature, where he would say something like, this person is now hired as, Robert Garvin is now hired as the constituency project manager, you know, and he addresses that to the SDC and signs it. That is one of the contracts he came under fire for because he had direct involvement in this person being employed by the SDC to carry out work in his constituency, of overseeing, you know, the constituency and making sure everything was kosher in that constituency. That was his job. There was another contract as well where there was some bushing and some Christmas work that was carried out. And he said, please pay Westcon Construction, which is Mr. Garvin's company. Right. And it was 1.45 million Jamaican. right? So
Right.
the point is that those were the two ones. It was for work in his constituency, really, that he came under pressure for, more so than his direct involvement was never proven while he was Minister of Education, giving out, yes, Westcon Construction got government contracts from the Ministry of Education, but in terms of Mr. Holness's involvement, there was never any proof that he was involved in helping Mr. Garvin or Westcon Construction to get contracts from the Ministry of Education. And in fact, Garvin started getting contracts from Ministry of Education even prior to Mr. Holness being the Minister of Education in 2007. He was working, in my report, he was working for Ministry of Education from 2006. Yeah, so that was under the PNP government. But in terms of the contracts that he came under some pressure for, was the ones where he directly signed off on them, related to either Robert Garvin or Westcon Construction. And in both of the cases, the prosecutor for the Integrity Commission said, we're not going to charge Mr. Holness for this, even though he was directly involved in the procurement process. And essentially the reason that was given is kind of, in my opinion, not something that is acceptable, but I'm just telling you what the reason is. It's that in one of the cases, especially related to the Christmas program, the Prime Minister said that at the time in 2007, the work was really carried out by workers in his constituency. And the SDC, which is the Social Development Commission, they had called him to say, we can't pay these people on time for Christmas. So can you tell us, this is Mr. Holness telling this story, okay? He said that the SDC called him to say, we can't pay these people in time for Christmas. So can you find a contractor that's a government sanctioned contractor for us to pay so that that person or that company can then pay the Christmas workers? And so they essentially accepted that explanation from Mr. Holness, that this company be used as a conduit to run the money through. So he said he never recommended Westcon to get any work in the constituency as such. He wasn't recommending him in that moment. He was recommending that this company be used to run money through so that the workers who worked on the project, the bushing and all that stuff, could get paid in time for Christmas.
So Zara, let me understand this then. You're saying that while he was at the Ministry of Education, even though he was a senior person, that Miss Golden Randall reported that for the period that he was there, 4 contracts were not reported by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. 26 contracts were unreported by the NWA to the OGC. And it had a value of over 33, almost 34 million, because 33,787,000. So as the leader of that organization, he would not have been held responsible?
I don't think he would have had the responsibility to report those things to the quarterly contract award. So, okay, whenever you have a contract as a ministry, you're supposed to say, okay, I gave out this contract to such and such company, and you're reporting that over to the quarterly contract awards database, and you're supposed to do that on a quarterly basis, right? Yeah. But in the instance you're talking about, the Ministry of Education, yes, gave contracts to Westcon, and in some cases didn't report some of them to the quarterly contract awards database that is now handled by the Integrity Commission, but back then it was the OCG, the Office of the Contractor General.
Right.
So the point is that I don't believe Holness has that responsibility. I think that that would have been more of an administrative responsibility, and the permanent secretary is the one that would have absolutely been responsible. Now, her name is Sewell, and in fact, if you look at who the the Integrity Commission mentioned as maybe should have been charged on this front was the permanent secretary at the time, which was Audrey Sewell. I don't know if you can put that at the foot of Mr. Holness. I'm not sure that would have been his responsibility, that kind of an admin task. I'm not sure. But they wrapped Audrey Sewell for it. And similarly, NWA, National Works Agency, which didn't report the contracts over to the Office of the Contractor General at the time, the Quarterly Contract Award Database, that head was Everton Anderson, not Anderson, excuse me. Sorry, Everton Anderson is at the National Health Fund. Mistake. Everton Hunter, and that man is still there now.
Okay. Now, the building of the structure, where his home is that Shenstone Drive? He's saying here that total cost of land preparation, construction, and landscaping was 52 million Jamaican, spent over 4 years, financed by savings, salary, bank loans, and suppliers' credit. February 16, 2016, Holness said the second phase involved erection of the structure during 2013 at a cost of approximately 35 million. He notes that financing came from a 10 million home improvement loan from the Bank of Nova Scotia, $3 million mortgage from Jamaica National, and suppliers' credit of approximately 15.6 million. Were you able to find any of those loan notes?
What you're reading from?
It's a collection from the news release interviews Holness gave back at that time.
I haven't found any evidence of loans except for the one that he and his wife got in 2000, I think it was 2, when they bought their Mona house, their townhouse.
Right. That's the only time you ever found a mortgage
Correct.
loan that they were paying, correct?
Yes, that's the only one I've found. I haven't found any since. And then the first purchase was 08 for ADMAT, at least the ones we know of. 08 September. So since that mortgage from 02 on his Mona house, I haven't seen any entry from 02 for any loan.
With the other places he's been involved with before 2015.
So it still come back. Where did he get the money from?
Right. And this is what we're trying to figure out. Now,
he will say, and this is true. I believe that, I don't know if it's true that he earned money from it, but I can say that he had a taxi company. There was a company called Deledo Taxi Service, right. I think it was him and his wife and Robert Garvin were on that one. I think there was Sunshine Mobile Company Limited as well. And I think it was him and Robert Garvin on that one, or maybe I'm mixing up the order. But the point is that he was affiliated with those two companies that were transportation companies, at least those registered over at the company's office. And Deledo, I think, is dissolved now. And I think maybe Sunshine is also dissolved. But at the time, way back, he had these companies or was affiliated with these companies. So maybe he was doing very well in the taxi business. We don't know.
But that would not put out the kind of monies that he was saying he got a loan on. Well, back then, supposedly, he had interest in Positive Jamaica Foundation Limited, right? And then, of course, there was the West Central St. Andrew Trust and Omega Bridge Finance Limited, which he and his wife has interest in. So, I mean, this is where his wife comes in with Robert Garvin. They started a finance company, and they also started a construction company that they have interest in. Mr. Holness was an officer. I think it might have been the same Westcon that they
No,
had.
no. There was no record that he was an officer of Westcon Construction. Let's
Not
be
Westcon.
clear.
Okay, let me see here.
The officers of Westcon were Robert Garvin and
Right.
another person,
but
Donovan Simpson.
the finance company, they definitely had interest in there.
Omega Bridge, yeah.
Yeah. Along with shareholder with Garvin. Okay. I know there's a construction company. I can't remember the name of it, but it came up before.
Who is Robert Garvey?
A friend of Mr. Holness.
His name keep on cropping up. Who is Robert Garvey?
He's a contractor because he got a lot of contracts from the Ministry of Education, from the National Work Agency. He have over 30 contracts from them up to 2019. That was worth almost $34 million. And I'm sure he's still competing for contracts.
What is his background? What is his background?
You know his background directly.
What is his background?
I don't know his full background, to be honest with you. Here's what I know about him. I know that he was in business with Mr. and Mrs. Holness, both of them. Okay? And as Herb said, it was either in the area of the loans business, Omega Bridge, or the taxi business, or on nonprofit organizations, right?
Yeah.
But additionally, he was, I think he's originally from Mobay. Think so, right? Because he gets a lot of contracts, NWA contracts for works and, like fixing bushing or drains, cleaning out drains and that kind of thing. He gets a whole ton of contracts or got a whole ton of contracts in St. James, especially in the constituency that Edmund Bartlett, who is our Minister of Tourism, oversees, right? That's his constituency. He gets a lot of contracts from Bartlett's constituency. Yeah. So I think he's a Montegonian. Anyway, when I asked a question to Donovan Simpson, who is the other person within Westcon Construction who tells me he's never benefited from any money from Westcon Construction, he just put his name there, I guess, to give it some street credit, the Westcon Construction. That's what basically he told me. And he said he's never benefited from any of the money there from that Westcon has gotten over the years. And he told me that him, Robert Garvin, and Andrew Holness are all friends, and they've been friends for a long time. That's what he told me. And I think Mr. Siaga, Edward Siaga, knew Robert Garvin and Andrew Holness. I don't know what the relationship is, but the point is that Mr. Holness and Robert Garvin, even in the interview that he did with the Integrity Commission, Mr. Holness did admit that he's known Robert Garvin for more than 20 years. And Robert Garvin became, he says, before he became project manager for his constituency, back in around 2008, when each constituency was required to have a project manager, he said that Garvin was already kind of playing that role in his constituency before it was a formal role. So the point is that him and Mr. Holness have enough history together.
Was there a chance that Garvin was involved in any of the land purchases on behalf of Holness? Can you recall that?
Was he involved in any of the land purchases?
Because I saw it somewhere before, but I cannot for the life of me.
I have not seen. Let me tell you something. This is kind of strange. This is strange, right? This is strange. I'm going to tell you something that's strange. I remember when I was on the campaign trail with Mr. Holness at the time in 2016 February, and I specifically asked Mr. Holness, who is Robert Garvin, right? Because I was asking him about ADMAT at the time. Was I asking him about ADMAT? It was toward the end of my piece. I wish you guys could play it, right? I said, who is Robert Garvin? And he said, he's the company secretary. What's the problem? So I find that even that very strange that he's the company secretary. And what I took away from that is that it was ADMAT's company secretary.
Yes, that's true. Like, I remember him saying that.
Anyway, back in that same period of time, I had discovered a document. I think it was under the Access to Information Act. I had actually gotten a hold of a document. You remember that property up in Wycliffe Close I was telling you about? That was just a land at the time in 2009 when it was purchased.
Yep.
They're now building townhomes on it. But from even, I think, that period of time, from way back before now, Robert Garvin, on behalf of ADMAT, had filed paperwork with, I think it was NEPA, National Environment and Planning Agency, to build townhomes up there. So that is how I came across Robert Garvin's name and how he got into the mix in the whole place, because at the time I was just trying to get some information on what was happening up at Wycliffe Close. And it was during that whole process of trying to retrieve information that I found that Robert Garvin was, on behalf of ADMAT, making an application to NEPA. So in that time period, when Mr. Holness said to me, when I asked the lawyer about it, he said, this is Patrick Bailey now, he said he's just acting as the agent for the company, right? And doing the paperwork for the company. That's not a big deal. That's what Patrick Bailey told me. But Mr. Holness, at the very end of our interview, said something like, he's the company secretary. What's the problem? So I don't know if ADMAT had Robert Garvin as a part of it, because he said something about Robert Garvin being the company secretary. But Patrick Bailey said he was just acting as the agent to do the paperwork. So I don't know about him purchasing anything on behalf of Mr. Holness, but in terms of paperwork, he's definitely done paperwork on behalf of ADMAT.
No, the Gleaner says that Robert Garvin has been associated with Prime Minister Andrew Holness in various capacities. And Garvin is known to have been employed in Holness's St. Andrew West Central constituency and his personal business. Additionally,
Yep.
Garvin was a director in the Positive Jamaica Foundation Limited, where Holness remains a director. They were also listed as directors of the company's Sunshine Mobile Company, which we mentioned earlier. So you can see, and not to forget, it does say here, however, it does not mention that Garvin and Juliet Holness, the Prime Minister's wife, are listed as directors of the company Omega Bridge Finance, which had investments as its core business activity. So, you know, I am trying to remember where I saw the report that said that.
Mike, what do you make of all this?
Yeah.
Mike, what do you make of all this?
I listened very keenly. What I find interesting is that clearly there are related party transactions, but someone is not just a secretary or an agent just like that. There's an element of trust that has been built up here. And this is what you could call a straw person in all the deals, because Garvin seems to be very opportunistic and certainly very indispensable. And therefore, I would say, in the interest of fairness, deserves to have a very bright light shined on his role to see exactly why he seems so indispensable to the Prime Minister. That's it, because you never see smoke without fire. Let's be real. And Mr. Garvin is occupies some very key roles, and yet there's a laissez-faire approach. He's just this, he's just that. He's clearly more than that. So I think that Mr. Garvin's role needs to be looked at carefully to see exactly where his footprints have been recorded.
The last piece to that, Michael,
Last,
that we need. Let me just finish quick last. The last
go
piece
ahead,
that we need to mention. Let's mention the fact that the $22 million project started by Mrs. Holness around 2012. Our company, JAJ Development Holdings, started that project to build this property in the Stony Hill here area. Lease flats, I believe it is. $22 million. And what we have discussed at length on Reason with Rattigan is that today it's valued at over $800 million. It was approved to be a 3-story complex, which when you look from the front, it's 3 stories. But when you journey around the back of the property, it's 5 stories. So maybe Zara could tell us if that violation is enough to have the KSAMC withdraw the permit and have her, well, of course, she's in court trying to force her neighbor to have a drainage system run across her property. And that case is still in court. So what role would KCMC play now that she's in clear violation? What do they plan to do about this property? Because they've forced other people to tear down their properties because they exceeded height requirements or the number of level requirements. You familiar with that, Zara?
Has it been the KSMAC or a court would order them? Sometimes I think a court gets involved. So I'm not sure it's the KSAMC who is, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't know.
They issued a permit and they forced some guy off his King's to tear down his place. But instead of the 2 stories that proved it for, he went about 4. And they made him tear it down. So, and recently the JLP has said they're going to contest the last division seat that the PNP had won. And that even though there was a recount and they lost the recount. So now they're threatening to tie up the seat in court. I don't know if you have any response on that.
But I'm not following how we got to that from
because again they manipulated the system with transfer tax and other issues to come out in a favorable fashion.
Okay.
But now that they have lost the KSAMC mayoral seat, now what is happening is the mayor can take a look at the building where she has violations and effectively shut it down.
Which building has violations?
The one up at Lee's flat. The one.
Okay, the one by Mrs. Holness. Okay.
Right. It started at 22 million and it's now up to over 800 million. So she has a lot to lose. And to protect herself, we believe that she's starting up another court case. She's going after the woman to get the drainage approved. I'm sure you wouldn't want anybody to come across your property with urine and feces drainage. And this woman has said no, but she's taken her to court to force her to do it. So now here we go. Now that the KSMC has changed, now they're trying to end run to get around the elections and try to force a new election.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Okay. Okay. But another thing too, Herb, is where are they getting the money to do the construction of these 4 townhomes? I mean,
Now,
we haven't
there you
spoken
go.
about that. These townhomes are, I mean, I have a picture of it in the story that I did.
Yep.
They're up in Beverly Hills. Construction takes money.
Yep.
Where is this company, Estate Bridge Development Limited, getting the money, which is backed in part by Holness? Where are they getting the money to do this construction? And is it declared, this money that they are using, where is it from? Is it a loan from a bank? Is it a loan from an individual? I mean, who is giving them the money for this work? Or are they doing
Zara,
it
I
out
have
of
a question for you.
Because, another thing that we keep hearing about is savings and salary and Okay, salary is one thing, but where are the savings coming from? Again, we have to get more clarity. As I said, he had a loans company, definitely a taxi. Was that enough to generate the kind of savings to be able to purchase this place? And again, where is the money and the financing coming from to do these 4 townhouses? That's another question.
I have a question for you, Zara.
It needs further investigation. That's all I can say, because there are a lot of things that the Prime Minister has approved in Jamaica, like all of these high-rise buildings that KSMC approved while they held the power. We have not had an explanation as to where did the funding come from to put all these high-rise buildings up, including hers. So, it all falls in. Mike, sorry.
Zara,
She can hear you.
I have a question for you. What is Miss Holness' background? What is Miss Holness' background?
Accountant.
What was she involved in?
Say what?
She has a master's degree in accounting.
I was asking.
And she.
Okay.
And,
what other thing we know about her? Was she involved in the construction industry?
Real estate, yeah, developer.
How long has that been real estate developer? Since she's been in office?
What I want to ask, sorry, can I?
I don't think Mikey hearing you.
Want to ask a question, Mikey.
Just go ahead, man. Yeah.
The question I want to ask, either Zaria, these are the companies that the Holnesses and their partners were involved with. Were these companies registered, and were they filing statutory? Were they compliant with the statutory stuff that that they can be monitored, or they have a history that can be looked at financially?
Well, private companies like these are not required to file.
Because they're saying that, well, the possibility exists that they could say that they get money. Okay.
Private companies are required to file annual returns. And I think in at least 1 or 2 of the cases, the reason that the company's office dissolved some of the companies that these individuals were affiliated with was because they weren't filing annual returns. So the company office, I think, kind of just removed them from the list of companies. I think 1 or 2 of those companies, as I said, like maybe the taxi company or so, I can't remember exactly. But the long story short is that their financials are not required. As private entities, we're not required. None of us that has a registered company is required to file these financials. What's required when financials are required, I should say, is when you're a nonprofit. So the first step in becoming a nonprofit is to register over at the company's office. And as a nonprofit, that structure, you need to file every year, not just the annual returns, which is, the address of the business, the address of, basically who the directors are, their names, that kind of thing. But you also have to file financials as a nonprofit. That's due at the company's office every year too. But for nonprofits, not for private entities like the ones we're speaking about. So there was no way for us to figure out how much are these companies
so
bringing
that would make it like in trying to do so in trying to do a paper trail as to how the Holness is finance their real estate or whatever transactions. If they say that they make some super profit from these companies, there's no way anybody could say yay or not.
Well, the Integrity Commission has the power to investigate the yay or the nay, which is why I believe in, I'm not saying implicating these two at all, the Prime Minister or the Speaker of the House, Mrs. Holness, his wife. I'm not implicating them. What I'm saying is the thing that we've been hearing about, which is the illicit six. I believe that in that case, maybe that's why they're able to say that there are 6 parliamentarians that would fit into that category, because maybe their financial declarations did not add up. So maybe they have the ability to investigate, but I certainly, as a reporter, don't have the ability to investigate their financials to the level. I can point out whatever I see in public records, but in terms of being able to investigate, that's the Integrity Commission's jurisdiction.
Okay.
I just want to say one more thing regarding, Mr. Holness not being charged. So I was saying about this Westcon being recommended as a conduit to pay Christmas workers. And so what the prosecutor had said was that the explanation that Mr. Holness gave was essentially not contradicted by the SDC. And because at the time when this was going on back in 07, the Constituency Development Fund hadn't even been formed yet. It was formed in, I think it was 08. And so whatever rules were around at the time were not clear as to what were the rules of engaging contractors and that kind of thing. And so because of that, she didn't charge him based on that. No, the other one regarding him being given the role of project manager, Mr. Holness explained, Mr. Garvin being given the role of project manager, Mr. Holness explained to the investigators that the CDF, which is the Constituency Development Fund, had instructed or given advice to the MPs themselves, including him, that each of them needed to select a project manager. And so that was an instruction he was following from the CDF office to select a project manager for his constituency. So that's another reason why I need to finish that story so I'm fair. Another reason why he wasn't charged, right? So I'm just giving you the scope of what the Integrity Commission said. So they said that the Integrity Commission basically said that, like, the government agencies, the NWA, the Ministry of Education, they should have been charged for not reporting to the quarterly contract award database the various contracts that were awarded to Westcon. But they then said because of the passage of time, the Integrity Commission said, oh, the passage of time, it would be an abuse of process, which some of us disagree with. But I'm just telling you, they never charged them either, even though they had the evidence to actually charge those. They said because of the amount of years that passed, they weren't going to go for an abusive process, or they could be guilty of an abusive process. So you can interpret what you want to interpret from that, but I'm just telling you, I wanted to finish that story because I had started it, but I never finished.
But there was never any law that governed a time frame for prosecution concerning any of that, right, Zara? There's no statute of limitations on corruption.
I don't know of a statute of limitations on corruption. I don't know one. But in that instance, I don't think it was necessarily about corruption. Is it corruption if you don't report the quarterly contract awards to, your contracts to the Office of the Contractor General? Is that an administrative breach more so than an act of corruption? I don't know how they see it.
When you're spending the people's money, which is well over 33 million and 30 contracts, that's not a simple administrative breach. That's a deliberate act to obfuscate. So they knew what they were doing. So, but the people will never decide because they never brought the case to the people. That's the problem.
Yeah. I'm of the opinion too that the Integrity Commission on that front may have erred where that is concerned. I believe that they should have given the persons charged the opportunity to defend themselves and say that. Let them say that. It's an abusive process, but they should have been charged, in my view. I'm a lay person, however, I'm not an attorney.
Yeah. You did well.
Well, on that note, I think we'll come to the end of the program. But before we leave, I want to go around and get your final remarks, starting with Mike.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for having me. I get to share the platform with his team, Zara, as she's done a yeoman's task in her digging. But I think what Zara has done underscores one of my biggest concerns. And that is, where is the rest of the media in Jamaica? I'm of the humble opinion that the media exists to balance the people's interests against the government's undue influence that can occur in public spaces. And so as to keep Jamaicans informed, the media has to be beyond curious. And as such, our conversation today underscores the need for our public institutions to be stronger. It also underscores the need for the Integrity Commission to earn its keep and assure Jamaicans in Jamaica and outside of Jamaica that the stewardship is strong and capable. Right now, they may have their reasons, and I choose not to cast too many aspersions in their direction, but I say they have a responsibility to be more vocal. There are too many questions being asked. Fair-minded questions, objectively determined by people who are concerned Jamaicans. And I think we as Jamaicans deserve a response. We may be away, each of us has a different reason, but many of us left for opportunities. You will recall last week I spoke of the impact, the potential malfeasance may have cost in terms of SSL, and the fact that the government saw it fit to give itself a very handsome raise, and yet we're losing educators all over the place. The British are accused of accumulating Jamaican educators while Jamaican classrooms go empty. And we're talking about in some of our more storied institutions and high schools. And the benefit of that is clear when you see Jamaicans' performance in and out of Jamaica. So I think, all in all, the tone that your program has set, that shines a bright light on the integrity of the process is well deserved. And I think that, you know, based on the investigations by Zara and the facts that are out there, there needs to be more ground covered in unearthing why the Integrity Commission has been so inert in its responses to very critical questions. Or maybe they think that we're on an island by ourselves and therefore no one can hear our discussion and therefore they don't feel the need to respond. I would tend to think not, but I really hope I'm wrong. So I say, well done, folks. Zara, thank you for sharing. It's very exciting to listen to your work. For a man in my business, you always look for the tentacles that are attached to these stories because no one just happens to be rich overnight. So I think if Integrity Commission is doing its job, there are follow-up questions that the Prime Minister may be very uncomfortable answering, but I think he should be called to task on the matter.
Last, your final remarks.
I share my points wholeheartedly. I really believe that, you know, it's a disappointment that the organizations that are and institutions that are in place, you know, things like the Integrity Commission, the Contractor General, I mean, they don't seem to be getting the job done. And we definitely need more people like Zaria to highlight some of these issues, to dig deep, because it's not just about highlighting, but to dig deep into some of these issues, you know, and get more awareness, public awareness that can generate some heat on institutions like the Integrity Commission and the Contractor General and those kind of organizations, because more and more we hear about scandals here, scandals there, and we hear it from the Contractor General, we hear it from the Integrity Commission, but nothing, absolutely nothing seems to be done on these organizations to actually bring the perpetrators to book. You know, so we also need these organizations to step up from the media and from the investigative work that Zaria is doing, can help to make these organizations hold the politicians, hold the leaders more responsible than they're doing. They're proving to be very ineffective at this time.
Herb.
Yeah, Mikey,
Your
thank
turn, Herb.
you. Mikey, thanks for having me on and for having someone of distinction on, like Zara, and with Mike's outstanding input last week and today. I hope we've answered some key questions for listeners. But I hate to throw any cold water on how far we think we have come on this issue, because I had a briefing this morning that really woke me up, and that briefing examined major organized crime groups in Jamaica, transnational organized crime groups in Jamaica, mafia-style groups in Jamaica, criminal networks, and not so much gangs. But the people that are driving some of these gravy trains, the people that are dropping big monies in Jamaica, comes out of transnational organized crime, mafia style, and major organized crime groups. Now, I wouldn't challenge Zara to go digging in that direction because she would need a whole lot of help to do that. But I'm just telling the people of Jamaica listening and the diaspora listening that this is a part of the big picture, the big problem. Buildings don't go up overnight, and money doesn't get washed in construction without cooperation from people in the government. So we need to start challenging our major media, the Gleaner, the Observer, RGR, all of these so-called radio stations or media stations that keep feeding the people the same Kool-Aid every day. You have to look at what's driving government. Why is government so damn corrupt? Who's behind certain transactions, certain building, certain money exchange? The prime minister should be made to answer because he's coming up short on his answers as to how his salary was dwarfed by his expenditures 11 and a half times his salary. This should not pass. We shouldn't be laying down and not saying a word. You need to ask the question, what major organized group, what transnational organized crime group, or what criminal networks exist in Jamaica that MOCA is supposed to be investigating, and they're so damn quiet? It's almost they could put you to sleep because they have not made any major bust or any news other than busting the small man. Our good friend DCP Bailey is about to leave us. His cover-up career is just about over because he's come up on age limitations in September. So where are we going, folks? Who is going to lead us? This current police commissioner? He has the IT skills, and he should be able to do a lot of intelligence-driven work using those IT skills if he's trained his people correctly. Predictive policing comes out of the IT work. That means you can predict with accuracy 90% of the time where crimes are going to occur and have the police position to do intercepts and other activities. But we have a problem in Jamaica that is still unidentified, that this police commissioner needs to do his job and identify who these networks are that we don't have a clue, who we're not saying anything. We don't know where all this fresh money that's being washed in Jamaica, where is it coming from? I know the Minister of National Security says he would give us answers, but that has never been forthcoming. So until that happens, we're at a loss. We're clueless. And we don't know what we're up against in the diaspora or in Jamaica. Thank you very much again. Thank you, Zara. Bian.
Zara, your turn.
Well, I first
I
want
like
to
the
say
smile,
thank
Zara.
you.
Your turn, Zara.
Thank you so much for having me, everybody. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for signing up for my newsletter, some of you. And if you want to, you can always do so at www.18degreesnorth.tv. And it's not just about plugging the website, to be honest with you. It's about, because of the work that I do, and it's so unique to Jamaica, I would encourage you to sign up from that standpoint because of the kind of work that I cover that some journalists don't want to or can't. And journalists, however, as a collective, despite all the criticism that we get, many of us have broken some very big stories over the years. And I'm going to give a shout out to a lot of them who've made impacts, doing some very good work that I've seen. I've seen good work from the likes of Jovan Johnson, Journalist of the Year. I've seen good work from Laverne Barrett. I've seen good work from Kimon Francis. Quite a number of people over at Nationwide as well, doing good work, Nationwide News. And so, you know, there are a lot of times when we cuss the media, but we don't realize that it takes a lot to do some of the work that we do. This piece, for instance, that I put out today, I've been working on this piece from 2022 sporadically in between, you know, not consistently, but the point is, it's not so easy to get it out, to get information out, to understand certain complicated concepts. And so I'm glad it's out. I'm going to be doing a deep dive on our opposition leaders, offshore companies as well, Mark Golding. So you can look out for that. That again has also been on the plate since, again, 2022. But it's a little bit complicated sometimes to put these stories out, to be honest with you. So I encourage you to sign up. Again, thank you, Mikey, for having me on to be able to talk to your audience, because I think more of us need to be more educated about the different levers that play in our country, and not just educated, but then maybe demanding more in terms of transparency. And that is the part that needs a louder voice than just any journalist. Journalists can bring to light what is going on, but it's the citizens who ultimately have to respond. And, you know, I remember I was in broadcast journalism school over at University of Southern California. And there was a teacher that said something like this: is it correct when you publish your story to also publish what a person can do in order to do something about that particular story if they feel so inclined? And I said, yeah, why not? But a lot of people, I think, disagreed with me, including the teacher. But funnily enough, there's a newsletter that I subscribe to, Popular Information, on Substack. And they, I think, was it Popular Information or maybe another newsletter? I can't remember fully. But they, I think it was this year, published how people can get involved and do things about the things that they are incensed about. You know, you can go to social media, of course, and holler at whichever minister might be disrupting something that you think is either, you know, not to your suit or to, you know, the detriment of Jamaica or whatever the case is. Of course, you can do social media. You can do the good old fashioned way and write a letter, write an email. You can create a petition. You know, what I'm trying to encourage people to do is, we as the journalists, and as I said, we as a collective, we bust open stories. But ask yourself, what are you doing about the stories that we bust open? How are you getting involved? How are you contributing to the fact that our leaders need to be held to account? And not just held to account, because I'm realizing more and more that even the Integrity Commission, the Auditor General, they bring so much stuff to light. And every year they're listing their reports, all the recommendations that they have in place to be able to say, this is wrong, this is what needs to be fixed, and nothing is getting done. And to be honest with you, in the whole grand scheme of governance in this country, to me, that is what is missing. The reports are being done. Journalists are breaking news. But nothing is being implemented to change the systems in a more transparent way. I'm not against the government. I made that very clear. In fact, this government is doing some very positive things for our country. Okay? So I'm not a PNP. I'm not a JLP. Okay? But what I am about is more and more and more transparency. And on that front, I believe that we're not seeing enough from this government where transparency is concerned. And not just transparency, but taking the recommendations of the different entities, like I just mentioned, whether it's the Integrity Commission, the Auditor General, or whoever else. I don't see enough implementation of those recommendations so we can have a cleaner and fairer system. The system doesn't work for some of us, and so therefore it needs to be fixed. And the role of civil society and of people on this call as regular Jamaican citizens, their voice needs to be heard more.
I want to thank each and every one of you. I think we need 1,000 more Zara, because in Jamaica, fear is a major problem. And for someone like Zara to be out there and pushing out these stories, I think she deserves our praise home. You can come anytime and share with us your information. I do not want to leave here without saying that the question of where Holness and his wife get this money is need to be investigated. And I hope the Jamaican people will think about it, because I tell you this, there's a strong rumor from between New York and Philadelphia as to where that money is coming from. Very strong within the Jamaican community. Okay? So we need, there need to be some, I don't know if Zara, you're gonna do this, but where does Holness and his wife get all this money to be investing? Okay? We need to know. We need to know, and I hope Zara, you take on this channel, this challenge. Okay? To my listeners, I want to say I hope you enjoyed today's program. And remember to like, share, and subscribe. Okay, so until next week, we'll do it all over again. And okay, bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
Daria. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks very much to everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
gentlemen. Thanks, Zara.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, Mike. Good.